the first problem statement for this podcast is that it lacks of promotion. So if you want to attract more people to listen to your podcast, you have to have a better promotion. For example, for our podcast, we actually target young voters and first-time voter. So we actually will promote our podcast through TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and many more platforms that usually those young voters, usually use. And the second problem statement is that using podcasts can consume a lot of time to edit, because we want to make our podcast offline and online. So if we want to make it offline, we have to certainly edit certain parts that are accidentally mentioned during the live, because we don't want any troubles happen or any lacking information during our podcast. Yeah, that's it.
After that is market potential. So the first market potential for this podcast is from the YouTube user itself. As we know, the number of people used YouTube is high, and YouTube is not only for entertainment, but it also used for education. We believe from the YouTube users, and when we make some marketing in social media, it will make this election podcast grow better day by day. And secondly is from the advertisement. If any company wants to promote their product in this podcast, they can promote their product through this election podcast. As an example, the guest who come and talk during the podcast will promote the product for few seconds. So when the number of streamer in this podcast has increased, it will make the possibilities to attract company, any private company to promote their product. Lastly, is from the investors. When the number of streamer for this podcast has increased, it will make the possibilities to attract investors from any company to invest in this election podcast. Meaning to say that the election podcast can make money through this way, and at the same time, the investors can also get the profit when they invest in this election podcast.
Next, the first impact for our podcast is that we can see the first-time voters will actually know about how to not be biased in making choices. So, as you can see, because sometimes, because it is their first time, they tend to listen to their parents, because their parents might have certain concept, certain perspective to certain political parties that they want. So they actually convince their kids to not vote for that parties. So it is actually awful to see, because we know the voters have their own perspective, have their own choices. The leaders that they actually want for themselves, not for the parents, not for anyone else, because as we all know, their futures is in their hand.
Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. For this part, I'm going to talk about realistic of ideation making a podcast. So it has been mentioned that we are thinking about making a podcast that related to the current politic or general politic that are practiced in this country. As we all know, a podcast is an intangible service that involves a host and a guest in order to deliver a content that related to the topic in each episode. The purpose of making this podcast is to generate a basic knowledge about politics and to give an extra information about the current politics and the general politics that are practiced in this country. So I think making a podcast is very relevant to the public nowadays, and it's continue to grow in popularity due its convenient accessibility and a wide range of topic. Many people listen to the podcast during a workout, commutes, and also before they go to sleep. Additionally, the rise of smartphone and the streaming platform has made it more easy than ever to discover and listen to the podcast on demand.
Voices of Democracy is a podcast aims to navigate the intricate world of politics and civic engagement. Our coverage segment aims to reach global audience. By streaming globally, the podcast can reach listeners from diverse geographical locations, cultures, and backgrounds. This broadens the potential audience base and allows for the dissemination of political education content to people across the world who may have low level of political knowledge and interest. Our goal is to make politics accessible to all, especially young adults and first-time voters, by providing both education resources, tips, and guides to navigate the electing opportunities. A political education podcast with a global audience can offer several benefits for business looking to promote their products or services. With a global audience, the podcast provides business with exposure to diverse demographics and markets that might not otherwise reach through traditional advertising channels. Podcast episodes have a longer shelf life compared to traditional ads, as they can be accessed on demand by listeners at any time through social media like YouTube, TikTok or Facebook. This allows for prolonged exposure and deeper engagement with the promoted products or services.
We will have along the business run. This cost is variable based on services that we use in range between 500 to 3,000 ringgit. Same also with additional costs, in range between 50 to 200 ringgit. It is crucial to budget for both initial setup costs and ongoing expenses to ensure a successful podcasting venture. Next, I will explain about revenue potential. The average CPM, cost per mile or cost per 1,000 listeners for podcast ads in Malaysia is around 850 ringgit for a 30-second ad and 1,176 ringgit for a 30-second ad. Let's assume that this podcast has a relatively small but engaged audience of 10,000 listeners per episode. These costs are...
For technical feasibilities, there were two characteristics in it, which is race analysis and threats. For race analysis, the audience will feel less interest in this podcast because there were a lot more popular topics to be discussed and will attract their attention. The second one is people will easily misunderstood the exact content that we are trying to deliver to the audience because they will think that we are biased to certain political parties. And the last one is we will face the difficulties to gain views from the streaming platform because like I said before, there were much more topics that will catch their attention. For the second one is threats, which is many podcast channels have more popular topics to be discussed and will attract the audience interest. And the second one is sensitive topics can be triggered the audience, such as the 3R topics, which is race, religions and royals. For platform effectiveness, there are three types of platform that we think are suitable for our content, which are YouTube, Instagram and also TikTok.
Okay, hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Afiq. I will explain briefly about the mode of service for this podcast. What is podcast? A podcast is an interview or a discussion session either alone or with a guest that take place online on social media such as TikTok, YouTube, Instagram or podcasts. For example that I can give is Keluar Sekejap podcast hosted by Khairi Jamaluddin and Syahril Hamdan, who have shared their opinion about current issue on the YouTube application. Next, we will move to the issue description. Briefly describe the issue or topic to be discussed. Give the listener the necessary background or context. Next, if they are guests, give them the opportunity to share their view and experience, like asking the opinion of invited guests about whether 18 years old voters are eligible to vote. Next, we go to the Q&A. After the main discussion, the host can set up a question and answer session where listener can post question or comment in the social media comment section. And the last is closing. At the end of the podcast, by summarizing the important points that have been discussed, thanking the listeners and giving a review about the next episode. Don't forget to use a music and sound effect to streamline the listening experience, such as background music or appropriate sound. Next, if they